and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You are here for Season 4 of Wrestling at Random, which has proven to be a season even more random than Seasons 1, 2, or 3. That was the edict when we were discussing what should the theme be for Season 4. And the theme is all the wrestling imaginable. Give it to the randomizer, let it devour it, and see what it spits out. We've had a few oddball things already in this season, promotions, territories that we had never covered before. That is again the case here for NWA USA Championship Wrestling from 1988, an episode of television. That's what we had to do here. That's what was going on.
Season 4's theme is the randomizer is busting at the seams. We've overloaded it. We scraped the internet for all of wrestling's content.
It is a double XL randomizer being forced to wear a size medium t-shirt.
Yes, it is busting at the seams. And so when we fire up the randomizer, it can pull some deep cuts. We had over in the bonus content where we put things that aren't a full show, things that, one match here, one match there, or something that's a couple of matches. It doesn't work, or it's just really too weird for the free feed.
Imagine that, something too obscure and esoteric for Wrestling at Random, the free feed. It ends up on the Patreon.
Yeah, so the Patreon actually got a Buddy Rogers Lou Thez NWA Championship match from 1951. So we're talking. There's a lot of deep cuts in
paired with in the same episode a 1977 Fritz Von Erich Original Chic Texas Death Match from Dallas. So, yeah, you think it can't get any more random than the NWA USA Championship Wrestling here? Try out our Patreon, and you will be surprised.
Patreon.com/wrestling at random. Or if you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, hit the subscribe button in your podcatcher there, and it will unlock the entire back catalog of bonus content, including those shows we just described here. But
there's a little button we should mention. You hit subscribe on the little bonus button in the Apple Podcast feed, and that will unlock all that for you.
But today we're going to talk about an episode that it pulled out of NWA USA Championship Wrestling. This was April 23rd, 1988. A little bit about this territory, because, again, we're in 1988, so this is the dying days of territory wrestling.
Well, think as far as territory wrestling, think that Pro Wrestling Today, the Joe Pedicino, Gordon Solie shows. We reviewed the U.S. version and that Canadian version. Think those shows as far as the weird, small, strange territories that were featured on that show that were still trying to make that style of wrestling work some 4 years into the national era of professional wrestling. I think that's what this promotion fits into.
Yeah, WWF and Jim Crockett Promotions have both expanded nationally at this point, are the killing territories left and right. In 1988, Continental Wrestling, which we've reviewed here on this podcast, Continental Wrestling sold to a man named David Woods. He was a Montgomery, Alabama television station owner. And in the summer of 1988, that left Ron Fuller's USA Championship Wrestling to start producing TV and running live events in East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, and Eastern Kentucky. So he started up a territory after selling Continental, and this would be Ron Fuller's last stint as the owner of a territory. Ron and his partners, they sold Continental Wrestling, and Ron held on to this region and rebranded with a new look, new stars. He founded the USA Championship Wrestling, and at the end of 1988, so 1 year in business, he sold the company to the same David Woods before retiring from the ring.
Wow. So the incestuous ownership pattern of this, I guess, this promotion of this territory. Such a strange time in wrestling to see certain territories, certain promoters understand and see the writing on the wall and just get that, like, wow, our TV got taken, all our guys got taken. This model isn't going to work anymore. And then see other areas, other regions, other promoters just keep banging their head against the wall, thinking they were the ones that could somehow make this, sadly dead format of professional wrestling still somehow viable.
In 1989, so after selling the territory at the end of 88, Ron Fuller, 1989, attends his first ice hockey game.
Wow. Man
And,
after our own heart.
Yeah, and Ron decided he loved it so much, he purchased 2 hockey franchises, Nashville and Cincinnati, in the East Coast Hockey League.
Wow.
So the
Ron Fuller
ECHL,
was
he
an
owned 2 teams.
ECHL owner. Wow. I would
Yes.
have figured like the Frontier League or the Colonial League or the SPHL, the Southern Professional Hockey League, but Ron Fuller, ECHL owner times 2. What a world.
In 1989. Yeah, so. All right, so that is so thanks to kingofkingsport.com for the history lesson on Continental and the NWA USA Championship Wrestling. We opened the show with Gordon Solie at the desk with promoter Ron Fuller. I'm already disappointed because this is not Ron Fuller's brother. This is not
Yes.
a man we've come to love on this podcast. Robert Fuller, the future Colonel Parker there, he was a guy that I never appreciated until we started doing this podcast. And I was like, holy cow, this guy's great. The stud stable and everything associated with the stuff that we saw him do was stuff I never saw, and he became a quick favorite of mine on this podcast.
Yeah, no, Rob Fuller, the future Colonel Robert Parker, as you said, he's on that Mount Rushmore of guys we were aware of but didn't fully appreciate, and that was changed by doing this podcast. Obviously, Big Cat Ernie Ladd, Nick Bockwinkel are a couple names that come to mind, and Robert Fuller in his own way certainly fits that bill. But here it is Gordon Solie and Ron Fuller. And you and I talked right before we started recording how this was such an interesting time in Gordon Solie's career, as this would be, one of the last times that Gordon Solie would be in this role as the lead guy, guiding you, the viewer, through a weekly television show.
Yeah, Gordon Solie at the desk, hosting this show and being the lead play-by-play guy. This is the last stop for that. His next stop would be going to Jim Crockett Promotions, doing kind of those event center style things, or almost being the color man to Jim Ross on some of these shows.
Yeah, kind of being the extra guy in the booth, or doing the event centers or the Wrestling News Network, as we saw several times, those segments. Here he is with Ron Fuller, and they are guiding us through this program, seated at the desk as Gordon Solie liked to be. They tell us that there will be a $1,000 Cyclone Stampede match here in the main event of this show for $1,000. Gordon Solie shows this check, which is larger than a normal check, but much smaller than the giant, oversized, comically large check that you would see.
These are the checks you would get. Like, this is a legit check from a business account. Like, when you would open when you would go to the bank and open a business account, you would get this book where, like, you had your personal checkbook, and you'd have the little ledger above the check, and you'd write, I wrote a check to this guy. A business check was a book, and on the left side was the register. So you'd write down who you wrote the check to, and then you'd rip out the check. So it was a longer check. And this was a legit check. Like, they get a nice close up on it. This was USA Championship Wrestling's thing. They were going to give $1,000 to the winner of the Cyclone Stampede match. We are, for context, in Knoxville, Tennessee for this match. Small crowd, and
a small crowd, but not a ICW small crowd. This is a studio crowd, but it's what you'd expect for a studio crowd. Tons of kids, tons of girls, people screaming, people are into it. This is a lively crowd. I do think that explanation that you just gave of checks and business checks, someone could do like, I don't know if they wanted to mock us and like put up the video of this on their own account. They could just mute you and it says, Jeremy describes how old he and Adam are.
Yes, I've worked at a bank, so I know a lot about the old timey checks. And so we go to the ring announcer Phil Rainey, who intros the first match. The first match is JD Wolf taking on the Australian heavyweight champion Bill Dundee. You want to talk about guys I just discovered that I like doing this podcast? It's Bill Dundee. We haven't seen him since the Memphis show that we reviewed. He comes out dressed like Elvis Presley. He's got a jumpsuit on and glasses and everything.
He's dressed like a cross between Elvis Presley and Elton John.
Yes, yeah. Which some would say was 70s Elvis Presley.
Yes, that's a valid point as well. He comes out to the entrance music that everyone would much more associate with Ric Flair.
Yeah, the 2001.
The thing I'm very disappointed about here is that we don't get a Bill Dundee promo. And I don't understand how, particularly in a territory like this, which is bereft of stars, bereft of talkers, how you have an hour of television and you don't put a microphone in front of Bill Dundee's face for at least a couple of minutes.
Because you're just saving all the promo time for the Party Boys.
Oh, the Party Boys. The Party Boys are by far, for me, the most noteworthy thing on this show. One of the most confounding groups of any promotion or territory that we've reviewed here on this podcast. I have so many thoughts, and most of them aren't fully formed. I'm warning you.
So this was a comedy match where JD Wolf has lost multiple times to Dundee, challenged him one more time. They do a crisscross drop down spot. Dundee drops down next to Wolf, who dropped down. And Wolf gets up, drops down again on the other side of Dundee. They do this a few times until Wolf falls outside of the ring.
Yeah, he does this last like drop down, or sort of like they're almost playing like drop down hopscotch basically. And the last time JD Wolf does it, it sends him to the floor. I am not convinced that JD Wolf is not Todd Gordon wrestling. It's also like when they tell us the story of this, which is JD Wolf has lost twice to Bill Dundee, and he's going to try valiantly to get a win a third time. In my mind, JD Wolf is this like young, undersized kid, like a Mikey Whipwreck, sure. And Bill Dundee is the heel. And this is going to be some serious match about JD Wolf trying to overcome the odds, make the crowd happy. And instead, JD Wolf is this scrawny, greasy jobber who's a heel, and Bill Dundee is the face, and they're just doing a comedy match. They did not prep me properly for what this actually was going to be.
The best part of this match are the punches thrown by Dundee.
Yes.
He threw some great punches here. Power slams. JD Wolf gets the easy pin in a comedy match. A quick squash for Dundee.
Well, it was so funny, though, that he gets the easy win here. And like they're making such a big deal about how JD Wolf has tried to beat him twice. And so I'm thinking like it's going to be a close match. Instead, it's just your garden variety squash. My favorite part of this, though, is when Ron Fuller is running down the loop, which we'll see many, many times here going in and out of commercial breaks. There is a town in Tennessee, one of the places they're coming to that they're going to bring a Cyclone Stampede to. Many of these towns. There's Hazard, Kentucky. There's all these different places. But there is a town called Ducktown, Tennessee. Ducktown, Tennessee. What a place for a Cyclone Stampede.
If you're saying, what's a Cyclone Stampede? You and I are at the exact same place in this show. And so we are all waiting patiently to find out what this type of match is.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was like a bunkhouse stampede, but they brought in like a bunch of fans to create a tornado-like effect, and they had to wrestle in wind. But that it will not be revealed to be that.
We will find out all together later in the show. Now we go to the video of the week, and Hector Guerrero comes out to join Gordon Solie.
He comes out to join Gordon Solie, and he is dressed in the most stereotypical way you can imagine. He is wearing the biggest sombrero you've ever seen.
Comically large sombrero.
It is the largest non-animated sombrero that has ever existed in the world.
Yeah.
And then he's got the like shoulder straps with the bullets on it. Like it just a weird look. And my favorite part about this is Gordon Solie calls Hector Guerrero vociferous, which I love. It's a great word. Hector Guerrero, like his character here is supposed to be guy from Mexico who hates America and thinks Americans are prejudiced. But you can tell Hector Guerrero's heart isn't really in this character, and he's doing what's asked of him. But it's such an odd fit. Hector Guerrero is a great babyface, and here he's supposed to be the stereotypical evil foreigner, and it doesn't land.
Wouldn't be the last time he was asked to do something his heart wasn't in, and didn't really fit the character of Hector Guerrero.
Are you talking gobbledygooker?
I'm talking gobbledygooker.
This is good on-the-job training, I guess, for what would come just, a year or two later. We see footage of Hector Guerrero, and when I say footage, that's being kind. A lot of times on this show, they'll go to arena footage, which is just one far away, almost handheld looking camera, but it's Hector Guerrero against one of the Nightmares.
Danny Davis.
Nightmare Danny Davis. We see Hector hit an awesome Saito suplex, and then he's doing commentary over his own match, like we've seen on a few different territories as of late. And he hits what he calls a flying body press with an inversion. And I don't know why, but that just broke me. I just loved hearing him describe his own move as a flying body press with an inversion. Like, it's not wrong, but I've just never heard that described that way. He's missing top rope moves. He's saying, he then makes an actually really salient point. He says, for all you people who say I'm not an American, North Americans are Americans. Americans are Americans. South Americans are Americans. We're all Americans. And I'm like, you go, Hector. You are a babyface to me.
Yeah, so like the clip we see, Hector Guerrero looks awesome, like you just described. And then he misses the top rope splash, and Nightmare Danny Davis makes his comeback with drop kicks, comes off the middle rope with the twisting crossbody. Guerrero rolls through. He's hooking the trunks, but only gets a 2 count. Hector uses a weapon and gets the victory.
He then says something about losing a rigged coin toss. He then says, you're prejudiced against your own people. The Indians is his direct quote, talking about the Native Americans. And at this point, I'm sitting on my couch and I'm like CM Punk and AEW in 2022. I'm like, tell me when he's telling lies.
After this segment, they run down the high schools in Kentucky that they're coming to. We learn that the champion of the territory is the Mongolian Stomper. I did not look up how old this man is at this point in his career, but whew.
I'm disappointed that you're not commenting on the sweet saxophone interlude that carried us through this video graphic feature of the loop, which included one of the headlining matches coming up in Hazard, Kentucky, the Dog taking on Cousin Junior.
I bought a car once in Hazard, Kentucky.
Really?
I did.
You are still alive.
My wife was looking for a new Lincoln Navigator to replace the Lincoln Navigator that we had prior, and we found it online in Hazard, Kentucky, and we said we're coming down to buy it. Drove down there. Took a look at the car. It was as advertised, and we drove that car back from Hazard, Kentucky. And
there were no suitable Lincoln Navigators between Chicago, Illinois, and Hazard, Kentucky at this time.
Not
on Earth.
Not for that price. That was a great price. And
I would hope so.
Like the guy said when I got there, he said, without the internet, we would have never sold this car.
Accurate. Again, tell me when I'm telling lies. I will say that for me to buy a car from Hazard, Kentucky, I would have to be paid. I would not be the one handing over money. Someone would say, I will pay you to drive to Hazard, Kentucky to take this car. I would do some hard bargain negotiating to get the best deal for me to take the time to drive to Hazard, Kentucky and take the car. So
yeah, it was worth the trip. So I have been to Hazard, Kentucky.
You are. Was this in 1988?
No, it was not. It was in the later 2000s.
Just think, you, a successful man, if you had driven into Hazard, Kentucky in 1988, a man who loved wrestling and had come upon, let's say, a Ron Fuller or a Gordon Solie, and had found out that this promotion was on hard times and they needed a mysterious benefactor. They needed a money mark. You could have been the man, the money behind NWA USA Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, I am no what's his name? I am no David Woods who would buy all of the territories
several times.
We then go to the desk where Gordon is joined by Bill Dundee, Doug Furness, and some hillbilly guy. Is this cousin whoever that you were talking about?
My deductive reasoning skills told me that this was Cousin Junior. I am not going to lie. That is as far as my research went. I
likewise.
I saw there's like 10 guys in this promotion, and we saw each of them on almost every segment. There is no one else on this show that could have been a Cousin Junior other than this guy. So I'm going to say this guy is Cousin Junior. For reference, it's one of the many like dollar store hillbilly gyms that would be in Southern promotions during the 80s.
Doug Furness feeling a little out of place in this promotion.
Yes, Doug Furness, who would go on to be one half of the Can-Am Connection in Japan, teaming with Dan Crawford / Phil LaFon. Here, yes, this felt a little bit out of place. He was never a promo guy. He certainly wasn't one here, but he says he wants to fight Buddy Landell for the title. Bill Dundee says he knows nothing about his opponent, Shogun. And Cousin Junior says, quote, I will not sit out back. Or says, I will sit out back and talk about tobacco, cows, and fishing holes. That sounds like something that you would encounter in Hazard, Kentucky.
Starfighter number 2 versus
Starfighter number 1.
The dog.
Starfighter number 1 was busy fighting stars in the galaxy and was not available. So Starfighter 2 here fighting the dog, who looks just like a random moon dog. That's my guess of what's going on here.
Yeah. A moon dog, a Kirkland's moon dog, if you will.
Yes. That is not the story, though. The story is the camera shot of a small child wearing a Say No to Drugs t-shirt. That then leads to a diatribe from Gordon Solie talking to the youngsters out there. This soliloquy ends with Gordon Solie telling all the young viewers to, quote, let your principal know if anyone comes to your school trying to sell you drugs. This was a thing in the 80s that it was like acid rain or quicksand. You were told to fear random people walking up to and into your school to sell you drugs.
Moving into the ring, and by the way, that young lady wearing that t-shirt, just say no to drugs. We certainly hope that all of you out there will heed that very, very good advice. Particularly, we're directing this to all of you youngsters in school. And if anybody ever comes on those grounds trying to sell you any kind of drugs, please let your principal or your teacher know about it right away. Starf, hey, I'll tell you what. This fellow is liable to give the dog a run for his money.
Yeah, weird.
Very weird.
But very of the times.
Very of the times. It's also always hilarious, particularly in 80s wrestling, but really in any wrestling. You watch these 80s wrestling shows and they're telling you not to do drugs. It's like, dude, everybody on this show
glass
is either
houses,
it's pots and kettles and glass houses and powder and all of it.
Yeah, so the Starfighter number 2 against the dog, and the dog is managed by Ron Wright, who is worthless as a manager.
Do you remember Ron Wright years later from Smoky Mountain, where he would be out in the wheelchair and he'd be, he's all involved in the Dirty White Boy, Brian Lee and those sorts of feuds. That's the same Ron Wright that we see here. You want to talk about Kirkland's dollar store versions? He is the most dollar store Colonel Rob Parker you've ever seen here.
And the Mongolian Stomper, the champion, is also at ringside during this match. Starfighter number 2 hits a crossbody, has the early advantage, and then Ron Wright interferes with cane shots on the floor. In the ring, Dog hits a double axe off the middle rope, throws Starfighter back outside, and the Stomper beats him up.
Well, that's not the story, though, of this sequence. Starfighter 2, I am convinced it's a Mulkey brother under that mask. He takes a full-on Mulkey bump through the middle rope to the floor hard. This looked painful.
Starfighter makes a comeback. He misses an elbow off the top. The Dog comes off the middle turnbuckle with a tackle.
A flying body attack somewhere, Tony Schiavone was screaming. If this is a spear, it's not a spear. If it's a crossbody, it's not all that cross. This was ugly, but also, I guess, if the Dog is taking to the air, this is what I want it to look like.
This match was horrible. All of this was bad. I hated every minute of this. Nothing to enjoy here.
It did not make you want to see Starfighter 1 make the save and then get the Dog and Ron Wright versus the Starfighters on next week's exciting episode of NWA USA Championship Wrestling.
Terrible. This was no good. The Tennessee heavyweight champion, friend of the show, Buddy Landell, comes out. We have officially become a Buddy Landell podcast.
Yes, that is one of those season 4 things that's occurred between season 4 and the episodes in the bonus feed, which have taken place chronologically at the same time as season 4. You can't get away from Buddy Landell, even if you want to. He's a guy that, well, I'm not going to put him on that, that Nick Bockwinkel, Big Cat, Ernie Ladd sort of like, oh my God, this guy's great thing. No. He's a guy I had no time for as a child, and I don't mind him on most of these shows.
Yes, he's moved to do not mind, but still surprising how much Buddy Landell we've got.
Yeah, well, I mean, his story was talented guy, had a lot of issues with substances, and so he bounced around from territory to territory and ended up probably being in smaller territories or promotions than he should have been given his talent level, but he just wasn't able to keep it together to be able to hold down a job, even in the 80s, in a place like the NWA or the WWF.
He was sitting right next to Gordon Solie. Gordon could have told him to just say no.
Yes.
What a missed opportunity. The wrestling, we always talk about how the wrestling world could have been different.
Yes, 100%. This whole promo is like Buddy Landell. I don't know if he had like sort of a born again gimmick here, like a sarcastic fake born again gimmick. I don't know if that was part of the deal with Ron Wright's stable. But he's just talking how Doug Furnace isn't living right. He's saying something about divine intervention, but then just saying it's funnier than hell that Doug Furnace got knocked off the apron.
Yeah, the match is Furnace versus Stomper, and Landell says that Furnace is using a weapon, and he's cussing while doing it. Yes. Landell comes out to interfere. He says he was out there to show him salvation, have him repent for his sins. He laid his hand on him to give him some inspiration. He felt a surge go through his hand to give him a message. He's not giving him another title shot. Gordon Solie says, don't go check this video out.
Yeah, Buddy, they're sitting down at the desk. And Buddy gets up and he's leaving. And Gordon just physically grabs him on the wrist and says, you're not going anywhere. And he sits him back down to make him watch more footage.
Shows him a clip of Doug Furnace pinning Buddy Landell. And
Buddy's reaction is great here.
Yes, he goes nuts. He says someone spliced film together to make that and walked out. He claimed editing tricks.
Yes, he asked the crowd, quote, hey, rednecks, could Doug Furnace beat me? And they all yell, yes, which is awesome because they are yelling yes, saying that the heel is going to lose, but they're also tacitly agreeing that they are, in fact, rednecks, which probably Buddy Landell was totally fine with. That was the goal. He didn't mind if they'd said that he would lose.
And now it's time. Gordon Solie at the desk is joined by Bullet Bob Armstrong in a mask.
Yes, who looks just like Bullet Bob Armstrong in a mask. They call him the Bullet. They did this so many times with Bullet Bob Armstrong, where he'd lose, a loser leaves town match. He'd come back sounding exactly like Bob Armstrong, looking all hairy and being Bullet Bob, but he'd wear a mask and he's the Bullet.
He's joined by Davey and Johnny Rich and his son Scott Armstrong. We're also becoming a Scott Armstrong podcast in season 4.
Definitely an Armstrong Brothers podcast, Steve/Scott.
And they come out to cut a promo with Gordon, and the Party Boys love you.
Oh my God. The Party Boys are Davey and Johnny Rich, who, if you watched WCW in the early 90s, you saw them as sort of like jobber plus guys. And Scott Armstrong, who is the skinniest and least talented of the Armstrong boys, totally competent, but nothing.
He would become a referee. Right?
Yes, he'd have
his claim to fame would be a referee.
Exactly. He'd be in WCW for a long time as a wrestler, but never really got anywhere. He'd go on to be a long-time referee with the WWE. But these three guys are the Party Boys, and they are
the Party Boys love you.
It's so forced. They just yell party, 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 party. Like it's who are the guys, the luchadors in WWE a few years ago that just yell lucha all the time? Like that's what they're like.
The Lucha House Party. Yeah.
The Lucha House Party. They're the non-Lucha House Party boys here. And then they have this incredibly forced tagline where they all lean into the mic and say, "Who loves you, baby? The Party Boys love you." But like,
we got them RPMs in the tag match, but the big daddy of them all, 32 grand, baby. And the Party Boys can have one hellacious party on 30 grand.
I'll tell you what, 32 grand, look out caddies at that budget is, look out Caesars, it don't matter. The Party Boys are going to party hardy. And hey, remember one thing, who loves you, baby? The Party Boys love you.
Gordon, everybody's excited. It's been talking for weeks.
There's no Party Boys to their gimmick. They're just Southern wrestlers. Johnny and Davey Rich look like they're in their 30s. Scott Armstrong is this skinny-looking young guy. There's no charisma. There's nothing about them that says these guys are going to party.
No, no, and they're barely boys. This is completely ridiculous. The Party Boys are so lame. It's great.
Well, that's so... Unlike the Hector Guerrero thing, which was just not a good fit and it was lame, or the Buddy Landell divine intervention thing, which was okay but kind of weird and felt forced, this is so bad that it is amazing. And we see so much of this. We get so many Party Boys promos in the second half of this show.
Mike Davis of the Rock and Roll RPM.
Oh, God. I hate the Rock and Roll RPMs. I think of watching Global and USWA in the early 90s.
I knew them from Global. Yeah.
Oh, my God. Just the worst. Those are the type of guys. And they're not the worst wrestlers you've ever seen, but they're the example of the team that's like a knockoff of a knockoff of a knockoff of a knockoff of the Midnight Express. And if they're a push guy in your territory, it immediately tells the viewer this is small time, like Al Perez being your world champion.
So basically, they're going to pick the order of entry into the Cyclone Stampede. We're going to have a mini 7-man Cyclone Stampede on the show today.
Yes, here as the TV main event to preview the 16-man, $32,000 Cyclone Stampedes that will take place at each stop on this loop, whether it be a Ducktown, Tennessee, a Hazard, Kentucky, or all high school points in between.
So Mike Davis and Scott Armstrong come out for a coin toss.
A coin toss to represent their respective dressing rooms, as Ron Fuller calls it, it was just funny to me. It's not like your team. He couldn't say you guys are the heels and you guys are the baby faces.
Yeah.
So they just had to say your respective dressing rooms.
The Armstrongs get to pick first, which means they drew numbers for the starting order of the Stampede. We're told, quote, it's a wrestling first. Usually it's 16. We only have 7 today for the mini. The order of the 7 is Scott Armstrong at number 1, the Shogun at number 2.
Who's Shogun, we should mention, he looks roughly equivalent to Ninja Go / Go the Ninja in AWA, yes, or Paul E. Dangerously's Ninja in 1992 WCW.
RPM Mike Davis at number 3. Ron Sexton at number 4. RPM Tommy Lane at number 5.
I love how the other member of the Rock and Roll RPMs is Tommy Lane, just to further the bargain basement Midnight Lane. Express. It's not Stan Lane. We got Tommy Lane.
And then number 6, Davey Rich. Number 7, Johnny Rich. So we get the rules. Okay. The rules are 60-second intervals. These guys are going to come in order. 60-second intervals. You're eliminated by being pinned or thrown over the top rope. So basically, it's a Royal Rumble with 1-minute intervals and pins.
Yes, that is in theory what we are told this is going to be. We also have
not. So the thing that makes this a wrestling first in 1988, after the Royal Rumble has already happened, is that you can pin guys in this.
Or that it's a 7-man timed entry battle royal. That is the first. I don't know that. I think it's more because there was never a reason to do a 7-man Royal Rumble. I will say, if the Royal Rumble was held under these rules, Yokozuna doesn't win.
It's true.
Or at least Randy Savage has a valid reason for going for that pin in whatever it was, 1993 or 1994. He sadly was not here. We definitely could have used him. We also have 2 referees. We're told that's how it always goes in this territory for Cyclone Stampedes. We then come back from commercial, and before the Cyclone Stampede starts, we have another localized promo. This time it's the Stomper, it's the Dog, it's the RPMs. Ron Wright is ranting. This is not good. Nobody's good at talking here.
No, it's lame. It's terrible. How is every single person on this stage bad at promoing? I've been bombarded with bad promos this entire show. I'm like, what is going on?
Well, that goes further to my point of you had Bill Dundee in the building.
Yes.
And these are all the men you trot out. I understand Bill Dundee was really just in a comedy match that had no bearing on everything else going on in the promotion, but still, it would have spared us these promos. I did like how we had a graphic going to commercial that said, hang on to your horses. That just felt like a very Kentucky commercial tease graphic. We come back and we have guys coming to the ring. And in 1988, there's no entrance music here for this faux Royal Rumble. Weird.
It is weird. And so, yeah, your $1,000 Cyclone Stampede TV main event. Here we go. Scott Armstrong and the Shogun start out. They fight for 5 seconds, and we are told 30 seconds remaining.
What? So you're 100% right. They start fighting. It's like 2 punches in, and we're told 30 seconds remaining. They trade 2 more punches, and we hear 10 seconds remaining. And then 3 seconds after that, Rock and Roll RPM Mike Davis is out. I legitimately had to check on YouTube. I went into the settings and I'm like, do I have this set on 1.25 or 1.5 speed? I'm like, I'm pretty sure I set it back from I don't think so, but this ain't right. And it was in my YouTube was on normal time. There was some weird Bermuda Triangle vortex happening here in Knoxville, though.
Yeah, here comes RPM Mike Davis. They double team Scott Armstrong. Scott with a super kick to Shogun. Ron Sexton is in. They are triple teaming.
Very short duration of time here. This was not a one interval. This was not a 1 interval glitch, and then they got things going. This was, again, no more than 20 seconds.
Yeah, so Ron Sexton's in there triple teaming Scott Armstrong. He fights back, but is quickly overwhelmed. Shogun gets dumped over the top by Armstrong. The camera misses the elimination.
Well, yeah, because we've got entrances every 4 seconds, so they constantly have to go to show that. You know what this felt like in terms of the relationship to real time versus whatever this time was? This was like playing NHL 94.
Yes.
This was on Sega time. Like, it's a 20-minute period that you play in 4 minutes. That's what this was.
Yeah, so again, not 60 seconds later, Tommy Lane is in. So the triple team continues. Scott Armstrong with a quick small package gets a pin to eliminate Sexton.
This is hilarious because Scott gets this small package on Ron Sexton, who looks roughly like Ron Jeremy. And this pin is happening, and the RPMs are both standing next to this pin, and they're like lightly stomping on Scott Armstrong the entire time of this 3 count. And the referee does not rule this to be a breakup, a save. He just keeps counting. This is so different from modern wrestling. And I will say this is the only thing on this show that I think is better than wrestling we would see currently is the ref just counting through this weak save attempt.
The RPMs double team Armstrong, and they dump Armstrong over the top as Davey Rich hits the ring. So Armstrong is out.
This timing was so funny to me because like they're double teaming Scott Armstrong. They're trying to throw him over. He's not going over. And every other battle royal you've ever seen, a Royal Rumble where this is happening, where another entrant comes in,
someone come in, make the save. You've been waiting for someone to make the save.
They're successful in making the save. Here, they tease the save. Is it Davey Rich or Johnny Rich? Whichever one gets in.
This is Davey.
He valiantly runs to make the save. And as he gets there, Scott just gets dumped out. Like, what? What are we doing here?
Yeah, the psychology is the bad guys have the advantage, and then finally, after getting the heat for so long, a babyface comes in to make the save, and that is not what happened here at all.
No.
Just the heat on Armstrong, and he gets dumped just before Rich could make the save.
No, this is like the promotion that would also do on the opposite end. They would do a War Games, and they would have the babyface team win the coin toss.
Yes, it's completely nuts here. So then Johnny is in like immediately after Davey. So Davey hits the ring, and then immediately Johnny's in. And
it's no more than 12 seconds.
Yeah, 12 seconds later, we've got the Riches versus the RPMs left. We're not even close, anywhere near 60 seconds on any of these entrants. After commercial, the same 4 are fighting.
Well, no, you left out the best thing. So the 7th man, Johnny Rich, is in. The Riches are running wild on the RPMs. Then we get another countdown. But the countdown is so great. Like, the announcers are confused. We get a countdown. That I guess this countdown was just to signify there are no more men coming. The countdown was to signify the match beyond the Stampede begins. Like, this was strange.
I forgot about that.
And the best part about this was the only interval that was close to 60 seconds was the one where no one came out afterwards. It's amazing that this territory didn't break through and break the national stronghold of Vince McMahon and Jim Crockett.
So these same 4 guys are fighting. It's very punch kicky.
The crowd's hot though. Like, they are, compared to what else we're seeing here, like, the crowd is into these 4 guys and into this feud. Like, this seems like it matters to the people here in Knoxville, at least.
Yeah, the RPMs throw Johnny Rich over the top to eliminate him. So it's Davey Rich alone with the RPMs, and this elicits a party boy chant, a party chant for the party boy. And Davey dumps one, then quickly dumps the other RPM. Davey Rich wins the Cyclone Stampede. We get party chants as he's celebrating.
Crowd's going nuts
for $1,000. And then we come back and we get more Ron Wright.
He's just ranting and raving about being screwed. The best part about this is Ron Wright is just an absolute cartoon character, a caricature of a pro wrestling manager. And Gordon Solie is just sitting there stone-faced, holding the microphone in front of him, even at this late stage of Gordon Solie just being the beacon of normalcy in this sea of completely absurd insanity.
This was not good. The RPMs are going for blood against the riches.
Mike Davis, my only note from this promo is that Rock and Roll RPM Mike Davis does not have any bottom teeth.
No, he does not. We come back to the desk where Ron Fuller now explains to us that,
This
hey,
is so great.
hey, everybody, we shortened the intervals to 30 seconds. So,
Because of TV time.
because of TV time. We usually it's 60. When you come to the big show, it'll be 60-second intervals. We shortened it to 30 seconds. So that's why there were 30-second intervals, because we had to get this in for TV time. And then they proceed to look at how much TV time is left, and they're like, we got like 10 minutes left.
Well, there's a few things about this that are great. First, as you said, the fact that they rushed through these entrances to then be left with a bunch of extra TV time, and seemingly a standby match was not standing by. But I also like how his explanation was that we shortened these intervals to 30 seconds. But what happened was that we had probably 20 to 30-second intervals that were counted down to us as if they were 60 seconds. So you're not really fessing up here and telling the truth. Like there was a bit of memory holding that they were trying to do here.
Yeah, so they screwed this up royally, because they ended up with all this extra TV time, and then they were just vamping for like, what are we gonna do with no match? The Party Boys have to come back out. They come out with their check, and
They're cutting the same Party Boys promo they've done twice already, saying, "Who loves you, baby? The Party Boys," yelling "party, party, party," telling the sorority girls to come hang out with them, which was a little weird when I'm looking at particularly Johnny and Davey Rich, which do not look necessarily of sorority girl age. Maybe Scott Armstrong could get away with that.
So everybody looks older than they actually were.
Well, and it's the 80s in professional wrestling, and so there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, so they want to party. Sexton comes out to challenge Scott. They go out and fight into the ring. The RPMs and the Riches fight at ringside. They brawl into the ring. The fight continues for an awkward amount of time. Like, you get to the time where you're like, oh, we got the crazy schmaz and we're going off the air. See you next week. This went on for like it was a little too long, because they still had that much time to kill. And the fight just kept continuing. And then they finally ran out of show, and the show goes off the air.
Yeah,
Totally mismanaged.
It was hilarious. I mean, the wrestlers did a good job of having this brawl after, but the funny part about it was it was the same 7 guys, and they went back into the ring, and they basically did another 7-man stampede.
Another stampede.
They're like eliminating people over the top rope, and the announcers are first calling it like their eliminations. They're like, well, I guess this isn't really official. What a show.
Yeah. What a show. So favorite thing on this show for you?
Oh my God. That's a really, really good question. Honestly, I would say my favorite thing on this show is seeing a past his prime, but not horrifically past his prime, Gordon Solie kind of on autopilot. And I think we talked a little bit before we started recording your feelings on it, which I think nailed it even more than mine do. But this not great, but still good enough Gordon Solie guiding us through this show in a very professional way for a show that did not deserve even a 65% at its best. Gordon Solie calling it. I don't know. I think my favorite thing on the show was like the worst thing, which was the Party Boys. It was so dumb. It was so ridiculous. Like, I'm trying to think of a modern, like it would be if you were unironically having like QT Marshall and the Gun Club as the Party Boys, but I can at least buy Colton and Austin Gunn as Party Boys.
No, you could. Yeah, no, that's not right. It's what would be a comp? It would be if you brought out if you had Jungle Boy and FTR, and you're like, You guys are party boys.
yes, exactly. Like nobody's gonna buy that.
Nobody buys this, and nobody bought that these three guys were party boys.
No, it was completely absurd. So I would say, even though it wasn't good, that was the thing I enjoyed the most, was absorbing the presentation of Johnny Rich, Davey Rich, and Scott Armstrong as the party boys.
I'm glad you mentioned Gordon Solie, because watching this show, if you just parachuted in, you're watching it. Gordon Solie, a total pro, even late stage in his career here. Total pro, totally fine. If you were watching this, you'd be like, yeah, that is a pro wrestling announcer hosting this show and doing a great job. But those of us who have seen enough Gordon Solie over the years and have seen enough wrestling over the years, there was also a few of these segments where there was a tone of, did you know I talk to real people doing real important things in championship wrestling from Florida in its heyday? This is ridiculous. Like, there was that tone a few times, and that made me giggle. So there was an extra layer to Solie's totally fine professional performance.
It was a subtle undercurrent that, like, if you were just a casual wrestling fan watching this, you wouldn't have picked up on it. But if you're someone who knew Gordon Solie and knew what territory wrestling was just a few years prior, you could definitely pick up on that vibe.
Yeah, and I think worst thing on this show, we've got a lot.
Ron Wright.
A lot to choose from.
I would say Ron Wright for me. There's a lot of things, but to me, Ron Wright was just so useless as a manager. Like, your job, maybe arguably your only job as a manager, is to be a better mouthpiece for your charges than they can be for themselves. Or in the case of like Nick Bockwinkel having Bobby Heenan, just be a wildly entertaining compliment to an already great character. Ron Wright brought none of those things to the table. One of, maybe outside of Izzy Slapowitz, maybe my least favorite manager we've seen here on this podcast.
Yeah, no, I would agree. That is the correct answer. I'll give an honorable mention to the Rock and Roll RPMs because they are just groan-inducing at all times, whether they're cutting a promo or they're just standing there or they're in this match here. Every time I saw it was a groan, and I don't know if that's like we both have global championship wrestling biases, but that's honorable mention there. But Ron Wright takes the cake, and he was in every segment. He manages all the heels.
Well, that's the problem. Is this territory has like maybe 12 people tops, and so if they're not great, it's a problem because you're seeing everybody all the time.
And with that, we're calling it a podcast. I mentioned at the top, you can support the show by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestling@random, getting all of the bonus content. We put out a show every week in the bonus feed that you don't get here in the free feed. So if you want to unlock all of that bonus content, just 1 month gives you the entire back catalog, hundreds of evergreen episodes that you haven't heard yet, all sitting there waiting patiently for you in the bonus content, where that's where the weird stuff is. That's where the stuff that's different.
Think you listened to this podcast, and we are telling you that we have a place where the weird stuff is at.
The best way to interact with the show, we'd love to hear, maybe this was an off show. Maybe this was a hot territory. Maybe this feud took off with the Riches and the RPMs. You tell me, you tell Adam. You can interact with the show via Twitter @WrestleAtRandom. Same for Instagram. We love to hear your thoughts on not only the podcast, but the shows. If you go and check those out as well. If you are familiar with the territory from back in the day, we love to hear from all of the listeners here. So please interact with the show there. And all of the links there. If you can't support the show via our Patreon, you can always support the show for free by subscribing to the podcast, showing your wrestling fan friends how to subscribe to the podcast, and your word of mouth is what we rely on. So in these times, if you could continue to, wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, continue to spread the word to them. That is a great way to support the show as well. And we have a YouTube channel. If you want to watch the podcast. People consume their podcast via YouTube. You can see the video version where me and Adam smiling faces, here are laughing faces as we're covering the show. You can watch us do this podcast via video at our YouTube channel. Give us a subscribe there as well. It's youtube.com /at wrestling at random podcast. So search for wrestling at random podcast. You will find it there. And I think that's it. And with that, we're going to call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. I guess I'll say thank you, Randomizer. It's another territory that I think you and I were both aware of, but I don't think either of us had ever seen an episode of. We would never have had any reason to without this podcast and without the Randomizer. So, as season 4 rolls on, it's as unpredictable as it gets. So I can only imagine what's coming up in future episodes of this season.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again